I bet you've been in this scenario before. Your team calls a site hit, utility goes out, the smoke goes up, someone dies instantly, and suddenly everyone freezes. Nobody wants to push through, and there's no utility anymore to make it into a site. The round falls apart, and you're left wondering, why does this always happen? I've coached dozens of players, and I've seen this issue time and time again. And honestly, it's the single most frustrating thing to see in ranked because the solution is so simple. It boils down to 5 key foundational components. In this video, I'm breaking down each level, and I'll show you how each level stacks into a guide that unlocks a site hit that'll get spiked down every time. And at the end of the video, I'll show you one real execute example that shows you how each foundation was used in order to gain access to a site in ranked. So let's start with the first piece of the guide, and the most important, map control. If you've ever watched any Pro League match, you know that they play the game in 4 phases: early round, mid round, execute, and post plant. Obviously, that doesn't happen in ranked, but in every low elo VOD that I've ever watched where the team tries to rush a site, it inevitably fails. And that's because they don't gain any map control in the early or mid phases of the round. Higher ranked teams usually build map control before they hit. They take space methodically, they clear common spots, and they force defenders to stay honest across the map. That means that when they execute, the defenders still have to respect the space that you threatened earlier in the round, and rotations come late. When rotations come in late, the execute is usually more effective because you have the man advantage. Map control is what gives your team options, but in solo queue, most rounds start with 5 players crowding around one choke point, waiting to commit. When that happens, you're giving the defenders all of the information that they need. They'll push out of the empty side of the map, they'll take space for free, and they'll pinch you before your team even hits. And you don't need a coordinated setup to fix this either. You just need to think about information and presence. Before your team commits to a hit, make sure that you've at least pressured the other side of the map or mid. On Ascent, for example, if you're attacking A, then send a single piece of utility mid, something as basic as a smoke in mid-arch, to keep defenders honest. It forces rotations to stay spread out, and when your team does hit, the site's actually a little bit more isolated. And again, if you're solo queuing, your goal isn't to control the entire map. It's to deny the defenders information. Every second that you keep defenders guessing about where you are is a second they can't stack the site you're about to hit. The second level to the site execute guide is how you time your pushes. Push timing is when your team decides to push into a site and how they do it together. I'm sure you've had duelists dive into a site before you've even used your drone or other intel gathering util, or you've had a controller that didn't smoke before your team pushed into the site, leaving common angles exposed. It's impossible to go over all the different ways that you can support your team in a push, but here's the specific tip that I believe is the most important for each role. For duelists, you're the one that everyone is looking at. Respect that and recognize that as the one leading the team into a site, you need to make sure that the team is ready to push in with you before you do it. Pushing in before your team was ready, dying on site, and then getting angry at everyone for not pushing when they weren't even in the same area as you to begin with is a bad entry. Before you enter, just call that you're going to do it, and then wait for others to get into positions to support you with their utility. Initiators, you need to learn what utility to use to match your team's speed in a push. If you're a Sova, don't use your drone if your team is scaling quickly. Use your arrow instead to clear the largest threat to those pushing. If you're a Skye and you see Raze satchel in, don't use your dog. Use your flashes instead to help advance the Raze as they scale around corners of the site. You have to match your entry speed and timing, not just autopilot and getting information while your team is already in sight. Sentinels, you need to force yourself to scale with the team to hold new space on the map. If your team is in a site already, I don't want to see you still in your spawn holding an angle. If you're a Cypher, for example, on Ascent, and your team is pushing fast into A, don't just sit at top cat looking at Arch. Start scaling into tree to grab new space around the map for post-plant scenarios. Controllers, I'm begging you to just look at your minimap and use the information that your team gathers to determine where to smoke. Frankly, being a controller can get pretty boring because it's basically minimap simulator, but you need to be active in seeing what your team sees as they scale, and smoke the right things to help them. Stop smoking the defaults and adapt. If you're pushing into Abyss and you see that your teammate sees someone on the minimap near the bridge, don't just smoke heaven and leave bridge open. Throw a one-way on top of the platform near the bridge to make it harder for defenders to keep that angle as your team scales into sight. The third piece of the guide is not matching your team's speed once they do decide to hit, or more specifically, inconsistent speed. You've probably run into this scenario 1,000 times. A player runs through the smoke at a choke point, is halfway into sight, and nobody matched that player's speed into the site. The player on site dies and blames the people that didn't enter with them, and the players that didn't enter blame the one that went into the site too quickly and without any info. High-ranked teams maintain consistent tempo. They know that speed isn't about rushing, it's about momentum. Everyone moves together at the same rhythm. Utility pops, the team commits, and defenders are instantly overwhelmed. The hit feels fast because it's coordinated, not because everyone is running full sprint. Usually, the problem in lower ranks stems from something called inertia. When players see the first person go into a site, the inertia to get yourself comfortable with going into a site after that is still pretty high. And that makes sense, right? There's only one of us in there, and there's possibly 2 to 3 of them on site already. But I want to challenge that as someone that's watched hundreds of lower ranked games and has VOD reviewed dozens of people. I want you to really think about what you think is better for the team. Pushing together and dying together, or pushing one by one and dying? In the scenario where one person runs into a site and everyone sits back, there's a 0% chance to trade anyone. But in the scenario where at least 2 or more people run into a site together, there's at minimum a non-0% chance that a trade happens. So why wouldn't you choose the option that at least gives you a fighting chance? Like I said, it comes back to inertia, and that's something that you have to get comfortable with. The inertia to match the speed of your teammate when they enter into a site is the biggest difference between low and high elo. Higher elo players know that dying is a part of the game. Losing rounds is a part of the game. But giving your team a 0% chance to fight together should not be a part of the game. So push yourself to try and break that inertia by going into a site if you see one of your teammates going in. It could be the difference between 4 people staying behind a smoke and the rest of your team following the 2 people in. Level 4 to this guide, and something not enough people think about, is how you path into a site. At lower rank, players tend to follow the most direct or obvious line into site, usually straight through the choke point or right into common defender sightlines. They'll wide swing exposed angles, forget to hug cover, or clear unnecessary corners while leaving dangerous ones unchecked. The result is that they get caught in crossfires or isolated before their teammate can even trade. Higher ranked players think about pathing differently. They know which lanes are safe to take based off utility, which angles are already covered by teammates, and how to use cover to minimize exposure as they move deeper into sight. Every movement is intentional. They clear the most threatening angles first, they use utility to block off the rest, and they path through areas that give them the strongest post-plant positions. And good pathing isn't about speed. It's about choosing the right lane to enter from and sticking to it. When every player understands their route, who's going left, who's taking sight box, who's clearing back sight, your hit looks structured instead of chaotic. If you're solo queuing, fix your pathing by thinking about what the defenders actually see. Your goal is to make it hard to predict where you're going to be, so think about all the commonly pre-placed crosshair angles that you practice on defense and try not to path within those. On Ascent A site, everyone goes immediately for the switch against the wall, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you see your teammate already going that direction, you need to path another way onto site in order to make the defender's life more difficult. Think about it from their perspective. If they have to take a fight and switch from back gen and you're in double box or dice because you pathed a different area than your teammate, that defender now risks getting pushed by you near double dice. So be intentional with where you move as you scale into a site so that it makes the defender's job more difficult. And finally, the last piece to this entire guide is crosshair syncing. Syncing crosshairs is one of those subtle things that higher ranked players do without even realizing it, and one that almost no one at the lower ranks thinks about. It's the idea that when you enter a site with your team, your crosshair should move in sync with theirs, clearing complementary angles instead of duplicating the same ones. In lower ranked games, you'll see 3 players swinging into a site with their crosshairs pointed at the exact same corner. That means that the first defender that they see gets triple aimed, but the second one goes completely unchecked. It's wasted coverage and wasted trades. Higher ranked players don't even need to talk about it. They just naturally divide their focus. That silent coordination is what makes their hits look effortless. It's not comms, it's awareness of what your teammate is doing so that you can maximize coverage of an area you're trying to take control of. This is actually the easiest of the guide to do in solo queue, and that's because you're in control of where you look. When you enter in behind a teammate, watch where they're looking and clear what they aren't looking at. Once you start syncing your aim like that, your sight takes feel smoother and safer. You'll get more trades, your spacing improves naturally, and your team covers more ground with the same number of players. It's one of those small habits that separates everyone dies together from we actually cleared the site together. So what does this all look like in action? Here's the clip that I promised earlier. This team starts off the round by pressuring C long with no control of A. As that's happening, you see the Raze finds an opening in garage. Now as the team moves back through spawn, the Sage hears them and Yoru goes to help them, but because of a pick that Raze gets from the control of the map the team has, Yoru now has to split his focus into top garage window instead, which means that the trade can't happen on the Sage now as the Clove gets this pick. Now as the team rotates, pay attention to the Sky on C. She's not leaving and she's taking fights to continue holding space and control of the map. And that's when the team times their push to A because they know that they have a limited window to do that now that they've confirmed 3 on C side. They scale into long and sewer, matching each other's speed as a team to make the hit more coordinated, and even with this deadlock not getting the kill on Clove, they would have gotten a trade anyway because they're matching each other's speed on the hit. Clove and Chamber path into backside site after the plant to pressure anyone possibly already there, and they're holding complementary angles in spawn and heaven. Then they eventually settle into less aggressive post-plant positions to make sure that nothing happens on the spike. Ultimately, this stuff isn't always going to pan out the way that you expect it. Sometimes the defenders have a solid play or read on what's happening and you end up getting screwed, or maybe you just lose a couple of gunfights, but the goal is to try and convert the highest number of site executes. And these foundational elements give you that ability. I hope you learned something in this video. If you did, I'd love to hear from you in the comments or have you drop a like. If you loved it, make sure to subscribe. Catch you in the next one.